Welcome to the YouTube channel for Sunset Canyon Baptist Church. My name is Russell Dixon, and I have the privilege of serving as the senior pastor here. You know, the only way we can bring messages like the one you're about to watch, both to our YouTube channel and to our podcast, is through the generosity of not only our church family, but also of you, our extended family. So if you would like to contribute to help support the work that God is doing through this ministry financially, you can go to our website at sunsetcanyonchurch.org and simply click on the button that says Give. We hope that this week's message encourages you to seek Jesus, and we pray that it helps you to grow in your walk with Him. Now, here's this week's message.
Can you do me a favor and thank Max and Brittany for leading us this morning? Did a great job. Hey, today, as many of you know, we've been in a sermon series called Blindspots, and today I want to talk to you about a very important conversation, and I'm going to have my good friend, Dr. Liz McIngvale, come in just a minute to help me with this conversation. But to kind of set up our time, I want to talk just a little bit from a biblical perspective, and obviously everything she talks about is from a biblical perspective as well. But how many of you have ever seen a toddler that has started to realize that they like hiding? Anybody ever see a toddler that they... So we have one of those toddlers in our household, and his name is David, and he now thinks that he's hiding, and so this is what it looks like. Like, he will go hide behind the couch if this is the couch, and I'll put my computer down, but then this is how he hides. So imagine this is, you can't see this, but then this is how he hides right here. So he thinks he is completely hidden, and half of his head is sticking up. I'm like, bro, I see you. You're not hiding, I see you. And as I was thinking about just his trying to hide, I'm reminded of the fact that mental health in our society, I think, is very much similar to that. And here's what I mean. I think a lot of our society tries to hide mental health or mental illness like this, when the reality of it is, we all know it's visible and we all know what's going on, right? And so the church can do one of two things. The church can know that people have mental health issues. The church can know that this topic needs to be addressed and avoid it, or we can lean into it and address it. And church family, aren't you thankful that we're a church that leans into tough conversations, that we have to address things that are going on in the world? So I want to walk through really briefly. I want to give you kind of a sermon in a sentence, and I want to give you 4 myths of mental health, and then the rest of our time I'm going to be spending interviewing Dr. McIngvale to share about her story and what she's learned in that field. If you have a listener guide, wave it in the air for me. I want to give you the sermon in a sentence. This is a mouthful, so get ready. Here's where we're going today. It is okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to not reach out for help. I'll say that again. It is okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to not reach out for help. Or more simply said, if you're struggling with something, say something. If you're struggling with mental health, if you know someone that's struggling with mental health, the first step is you have to be willing to acknowledge that. And we as a church have to be willing to acknowledge that and to talk about it. So I want to give you 4 myths of mental health that maybe you've heard these in church before. Maybe you have taught something like this that I think will help hopefully reverse our perspective on mental health and help us get in the right frame of mind. The first myth of mental health is this: the Bible doesn't say much about it. Anybody ever heard that or thought that before, that the Bible doesn't say much about it? There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of verses about mental health. There are several different specific examples. Elijah is believed to have struggled with depression. King David, if you read the Psalms, half of his journey is a struggle with what seems to be depression. The Apostle Paul, some people believe, struggled with depression. I'll give you a couple of verses. John 14:27 says this: "Peace I leave with you." And then look what it says: "My peace I give to you." That's Jesus' peace. He's saying that peace comes from him. He says, I do not give as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. That we can have peace of mind when we look and lean into Jesus and when we lean into the people around us. The second thing I want to share with you as far as a myth, now remember, these are myths. So if you go back and look at your notes, don't think, wait, oh my goodness, the Bible doesn't say anything about mental health. Make sure that you know and remember we're saying these are myths of mental health. The second myth is that Christians don't or shouldn't struggle with this. So I think in a variety of issues, the church has unintentionally painted this picture that Christians don't struggle, right? We come to Jesus and he fixes everything, right? We give our life to the Lord and we've arrived. And if we've lived life long enough, we know that that's not true about so many areas, and especially in mental health. John 16:33 says this, I have told you these things so that in me you may have, what does that word say? Peace. And then what does he say? So he says, you can have peace. And then he goes on to say, oh yeah, in this world you will have trouble. But then he says, but take heart. Why? Because Jesus has overcome the world. That means even when we have a relationship with Jesus, we may still struggle with things. But Jesus says, but take heart because I have overcome the world. And that we can overcome challenges and difficulties with mental health and really any and every issue if we lean into Jesus. The third thing that I've heard before that's a myth is if you're struggling with it, it's a sin issue. If you're struggling with it, it's a sin issue. And let me be clear from biblical examples that there are certainly maybe some times that that's the case. I shared this in our food for thought thing. So I have a background in addiction, and I was abusing Adderall, abusing substances, and with that, there was this incredible sense of anxiety and depression that I was facing. But in my personal story, that was a sin issue that I was battling. But the vast majority, I would say 99%, and Dr. McIngvale can correct me, but I would say 99.9% of when people are struggling with mental health issues, it is not a sin issue. And I want to give you one clear example found in Scripture. So the Apostle Paul has written a few letters in the Bible, kind of a well-known guy. And he, in 2 Corinthians, said this. He said, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. He goes on to say, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. He said, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. Now, the Apostle Paul is writing that as a believer, and it's unknown what that thorn was, but if you read commentaries, there are a lot of commentators that believe the thorn in his flesh was depression, anxiety, because he was given this great vision from God, and he didn't know how to navigate that and handle it. We can speculate all we want to, but I personally believe that there was a lot of that probably going on in Paul's life. So we can see it's not a sin issue. And then the final myth that I want to address is that there's nothing that I can do besides pray. There's nothing. A lot of times people say that about any struggle. Don't get me wrong. Yes, we need to pray. Yes, that's a great start, but there are plenty of other things that we can do. Galatians 6:2 says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. There are great people in the mental health field that are there to be able to provide help when you need help. But it all starts with us or people around us that are struggling, having the boldness to be able to reach out for help. And so with that, I want to segue into reaching out for help. I have asked my great friend, Dr. Elizabeth McIngvale, to join us today. She is in the mental health field. I don't want to tell her story for her, but she is the founder and the overseer of an incredible foundation called the Peace of Mind Foundation. She is a close friend of my Liz and myself, and we go way back, and I had the privilege of walking beside her and her husband through premarital counseling, and they are thriving in their marriage, is what she told me. But church family, will you do me a favor and put your hands together for my great friend, Dr. Elizabeth McIngvale. Thanks for spending time with us this morning. I know she has 2 young daughters at home, so add her to your prayer list as well. We're in the toddler stage of life within our families, but she drove out from Houston because she has a great passion to help people in this mental health journey and field. So will you start and just share, and I intentionally, for those that came to our Food for Thought combined breakfast, I wanted to intentionally save her sharing her story just about her own personal journey. So will you start by just sharing really what that was like and walk us kind of through the full history of really what brings you to today?
I think you said we only have like 20 minutes, so we'll keep it short.
We got 25 minutes.
25, okay. So I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder when I was 12 years old. I grew up in Houston, Texas, and really, prior to my diagnosis, I don't think we would have necessarily said there was anything off or, something going on. I think a lot of times we think, we're going to know if someone's struggling. It's going to be really obvious. And looking back, there were signs and symptoms for sure, but there wasn't anything alarming. There wasn't anything, really big going on. However, by the time I was 12, between the ages of probably 12 to 15, I started having all of these bizarre intrusive thoughts. They were thoughts of, what if I hurt someone I love? What if I don't go to heaven? What if God's upset with me? What if I cause harm to my family? And overnight, our entire family system became disrupted, broken. And I didn't know what to do. I was young. I was terrified. And I thought that this was my fault. I thought that I was doing something wrong. I thought I couldn't understand. And I spent a lot of time, months, years, however long, stuck in the why. Why do I have this? What did I do to deserve this? Why me? And for those of you who don't understand mental illness or you haven't personally been impacted by it, it's a living nightmare every second of your day. And the problem with mental illness is that we aren't talking about it. We don't understand when we're struggling with it that we're not the only ones. So we think we're the only ones. We think we're broken and we don't know what to do. And unfortunately, people that we love also don't know what to do. They want to love us, they want to support us, and often they want to fix it, but it isn't something that can be fixed. And so as I progressed in the sense that I got older and my parents tried to find me treatment, we went from provider to provider in Houston and we got told the same thing. We've never seen a case this severe. There isn't help available for this child. I got more and more sick. And by the time I was 15, I hoped and prayed every day that it would be my last day. I didn't think there was any way I would ever get relief from my pain until I was gone. The few hours of sleep I would get were the only times I was able to experience peace. And I remember I had a cross on my door, I'll never forget it growing up, and it had Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. And I can tell you I read that verse every single day. And I thought to myself, okay, I have to trust there's a bigger picture and that I can't lean on what I'm going through and my own beliefs or my own thoughts right now, and that there has to be a reason, or I have to just trust God. And as a Christian, you start to lose a little hope, when you're a kid and you see other kids' lives continuing and them functioning and you're struggling and you're ruining your entire family dynamic, right? Everybody's falling apart because of you. And you start to just grasp at anything to find a little hope. And I remember I would go to church and I'd sit in the pews, and I talked about this earlier, but I would just cry. Because every sermon there was something. Today's even worship, right, the music, and you hear things like, because of God, you can live in an uncertain world. And I will tell you, if I didn't have faith in God, I wouldn't be sitting right here today. And the opportunity for us to have and allow Christ into our life gives us a chance at being able to accept the uncertainty that we have to face in this world. And for some of us, that can feel unbearable, and it did for me for most of my life. I was able to eventually get treatment. By the time I was 15, I went to inpatient treatment in Topeka, Kansas, and I got a little bit better. I got quite a bit better at that time. I came back home, and 2 years later, I relapsed again. And at that point, it was probably the worst point of my OCD journey, because at this point in my life, I was struggling not just with the why, but I was starting to believe and accept that I was forever broken, that I would never have peace, that peace was such a foreign thing to me. Like, people would talk about giving peace, accepting peace, and I didn't believe that was something. I remember my sister made us go to yoga once, and I was like, well, who can go to yoga and sit and be quiet? Like, because my thoughts were just, nonstop horrible. And the reality is that with time, what I learned is that we all have our struggles. We all have, so to say, from a Christian perspective, our cross to bear. And because of our struggles, we can learn our strength. And I will tell you, I still don't understand the why. And I think people that I love would do anything to get rid of my OCD today. But what I do know is that because of my struggle, I believe I've helped some other people. I believe that there is some sort of bigger purpose that can come from my pain. And that's the message we have to hold on to. The message that treatment's available. People with mental illness can get treatment. They can live a successful life. And something good can come out of a horrible thing.
So great. Can you all thank her for authenticity and transparency? It's so amazing. I think that's so important, whatever our issues are, that we acknowledge that and walk in finding hope and finding freedom. So what would you say? There's kind of two buckets, I would say, and you correct me if I'm wrong. There's people that have a diagnosed mental illness. And then the rest of the world that, even if you don't have a diagnosed mental illness, the last couple years have been crazy. Pandemic has just skyrocketed rates of anxiety and depression. So let's talk more about this other group of people that don't definitively have a diagnosed situation, but our society is struggling with it now more than ever. What practical advice would you have for someone who's battling anxiety, depression, stress, all those things?
Yeah, it's a great question, and here's what I'll say. Never in my life as a clinician have I ever had someone come and say, we sought treatment too early. But every day we have people say, we wish we would have come sooner. So if you are struggling to any degree that you feel like this isn't my norm, I can't feel peace, I don't sleep the way I used to, I don't eat the way I used to, I don't function the way I used to, you should be considering seeking help. And that is a part of our destigmatization model, right, that we really want to make loud, is there's this saying, I love it, and we did for a mental health campaign a long time ago called Before Stage 4. If any of you in this room found out tomorrow you had cancer, you're not going to wait until it proceeds to stage 4 to seek treatment. You're going to seek treatment as soon as you know, and you're going to be addressing it and working on it, trying to get into remission quickly. But with mental illness, we wait till we're in crisis. We wait often till it's life or death. And especially, unfortunately, those that love us and that support us, they wait, right? They say things like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, just pray about it, it'll be okay, you'll be fine. And we wait until they're completely in crisis and it isn't fine anymore. And so it's our job to start to say, we're going to seek treatment well before stage 4.
So for those people that are kind of in that space of, I think I'm really struggling with this, would you say you start by talking to your family and then you start the process of reaching out for professional help? Would you say it's in that order, or? I don't know that there's a right order, but I think you need to get professional help to get a proper diagnosis and then treatment. I think a lot of times our family is offering so much advice and feedback, which can be great, but sometimes they're not clinicians and they're not experts in this arena, and we really need someone who is. So, especially if it's a kid, we want to start with a full assessment to understand the full picture. For example, we went years with improper diagnosis without knowing that I was struggling with OCD. And until we got an OCD diagnosis, we couldn't get proper treatment for myself. And so you want to know what the real picture is. We have to start by talking to someone. And hopefully that person will create a safe space and encourage us to get appropriate treatment. So if a parent in this room has a child that's manifesting some anxiety type symptoms, if you will, would they start with their PCP or would they start with, walk us through
it's
that.
So hard. Please don't start with your PCP. It's okay if you do, but here's the thing, PCPs don't know, right? So oftentimes anxiety, OCD is misdiagnosed as ADHD or other diagnoses because people who aren't trained, right? A PCP is not trained to do a mental health diagnosis. So they don't know how to complete a full assessment. So I can't tell you how many people, let's just back up. For those of us with OCD, it takes an average of 12 years to get a proper diagnosis, and that's from the time you start seeking treatment. The reason for that is because it's mislabeled, it's misdiagnosed, because people don't know what to ask. They don't know the right questions. They don't know how to understand what's actually going on. And so PCP can be a great first step, especially because oftentimes they'll have a list of resources for mental health providers, but you want to get to a mental health provider first to get a diagnosis. Once you get a diagnosis, then you need to go to a specialist for your diagnosis.
And I would say just in the broad realm of, I've shared this story before, my wife has a different kind of health issues. I would imagine you could attest to a parent and then the person going through it being patient until you can get to that. Because in 12 years, Liz, it took her 4 years to figure out some sort of diagnosis for her, and it was very different. It wasn't a mental health condition, right. But just praying for that patience to trust that God will bring that right doctor, that right person to be able to help, I think is so key for everybody to remember.
Yeah, you have to be determined, and I hate to say it, I wish it wasn't the case, but you have to be an advocate for your loved one. My sister's here, and she could tell you firsthand that without my sister and my parents, I wouldn't be alive. And it wasn't because, it is because they kept me safe by watching me 24 hours a day when I wasn't safe. They loved me, they supported me, they promised me that it would get better. They gave me hope when I didn't have hope. And they kept advocating to find me the correct treatment. I gave up belief that treatment could work. I didn't think I could get better. I wouldn't have kept going or searching. They had to keep searching for me. They had to keep pushing. And so remember, when we're in the throes of despair in our mental illness, we can't advocate for ourselves. Other people have to advocate for us.
So obviously, you went to treatment. You're still, it's an ongoing process. It's very similar to someone who's battling addiction. They say you never fully recover. You're constantly recovering. So walk us through, what is life like today? What does that look like, living in the tension of, I have this diagnosis, but I've been given the solution, and I also have this great hope in Jesus. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, it depends on the day. So, what I think is really important to note is that I am not sitting here speaking to y'all as someone who's cured from a mental illness. There is not a cure, but there is management. So I think of my OCD much like someone might think about if they lived with diabetes, right? They need to take medicine every day. They need to adjust their insulin. And depending on what they eat, or if they had a good or bad day, or if they exerted themselves in sweat, had extra perspirate, whatever, their insulin has to be adjusted. Living with OCD, I may be able to function. I may, from the outside, look like I have it all together, and I can be falling apart. And that's why, much like your kind of hide and seek example, right? Mental illness is often very much hidden. And sometimes it's very visible, but oftentimes it isn't. And the problem is that when it isn't hidden, the assumption from everyone who loves you is that, oh, Liz is doing great now. We don't have to worry about her. She's doing awesome. People who know me, my sister, my mom, certain individuals who understand it differently know that it's a battle every day. I have sexual intrusive thoughts about my kids. I have to deal with things that I wish I never had to deal with. But I've learned how to keep pushing forward, and I've learned how to manage those symptoms and those triggers in a way that I can choose to now live by my values and live the life that Liz wants to live versus the life OCD wants me to live. And that is the freedom.
So you talk a lot about stigma, and I love that. Because there's stigma around so many things that just the world suffers with as brokenness. So talk to us about what we as a church, what we as the capital C church need to know more about stigma and how we can help reverse the stigma that so often comes with mental illness.
Yeah, number one is it's a really severe illness that we need appropriate treatment. Holy water and praying about it isn't going to fix my OCD. I wish it could, and I tried it all, but it doesn't, right? I need evidence-based treatment. I need a provider who knows how to treat OCD and can help me along with my faith journey, right? I need Jesus too. But I also need appropriate treatment, right? It's like that person who's living with cancer. Yes, they need your prayers, they need your support, and they need an oncologist, right? They need the treatment regimen that person's recommending. In addition, when it comes to stigma, we have to be willing to destigmatize mental illness, which means we're willing to listen and talk. When I talk about OCD and I talk about hand washing, no one cringes. But when I talk about sexual intrusive thoughts I have to deal with, or when I talk about, fears of harming someone and these sort of thoughts, people are like, well, what does that mean? Like, is Liz a danger? What, it's my OCD. I can explain it if you gave me a couple hours in more detail. But the reality is that we have to be willing to create a safe space where people can talk about anything. Because the more surface struggles, right, anxiety, depression, hand washing, like your PCP might actually pick those up. But the people who go misdiagnosed, the people who are mistreated are the ones who often live with more taboo thoughts or things they're more afraid to talk about because we often judge or we stereotype. And so, when we think about stigma, it's about changing our language to where we really start treating the brain the same way we treat the body.
So you also talk about intrusive thoughts a lot, and I think that's really important because I know that is obviously true with someone who has a diagnosed mental illness.
Yes.
But I think we all as humans
Absolutely.
struggle with intrusive thoughts. I mean, we, having toddlers, you have the panic thought of they're going to run out in the street and get hit by a car. So how do we, whether we have a mental illness diagnosis or not, how do we manage that, from your perspective with those?
Everyone has intrusive thoughts, right? Whether you have a big trip in the morning and you double check your alarm clock, even though you know it's been checked, or you double check the lock on your door because you're going to be out of town, or, some of my family likes to get to the airport 3 hours early just in case, and I'd prefer to get there 45 minutes, and run to the gate. But the reality is like, yeah, that's me. But we all have weird thoughts, right? That can be catastrophized or triggering, right? I'm going to miss this flight. I didn't turn the stove off. This didn't happen. What we want to understand is what function or impact do they have on our life? So actually, like the intrusive thought that my daughter might run in front of a car can actually be helpful because I'm going to then be alert to keep them safe, right? And stop them from running onto the street. But when we talk about, for example, OCD, we're talking about unwanted intrusive thoughts, thoughts that we don't want, thoughts that we hate, thoughts that disgust us, go against our morals or who we are as a person, that trigger us. We think, oh my gosh, what if this is real? And then we start doing these repetitive behaviors to try to get rid of the thought. So it's very different than a thought that, right? Anxiety in general can be protective, right? When you're walking at night in a parking garage and it's dark and you're the only one, being a little bit anxious or on alert is a good thing. It can keep you safe. It can, keep you aware of your surroundings. But anxiety that's so crippling you can't get out of your house is now destructive.
And I'm reminded of, we skipped over this verse a minute ago, but throw up Philippians 4:6-8 really quickly. So the Apostle Paul, and this has been something that has really helped me because we all have anxiety we wrestle with. And so he says, finally, dear brothers and sisters, and then the key part of the verse right here, it says, whatever is, what does that word say? Whatever is true. I find the things that we often stress about are not actually true. Like they have not happened. Like we stress about a diagnosis, we stress about things like that, and it's not actually true. It may become true, but we're spending all of our time going over and over and over and over again on something that may not necessarily be true. But then he goes on to say, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, he says, think about those things. And so I found just in my own life, and I'm not diagnosed with a mental health disorder, but we all have anxiety, we all have stress. The more we fix our minds on things above, the more, as the New Testament says, the more we take every thought captive and we compare it to the Word, then that's where we're able to go, okay, I can back up and have some perspective. Even though I'm struggling with this, I can still fix my mind on things above and not on the earthly things. So talk to us a little bit more, just like, I guess if I'm someone who's here today and I'm deeply struggling with anxiety, stress, or things like that as a Christian, what advice would you have for that person? And then paralleled, I don't ever want to assume that everyone in a gathering is a believer. What would you offer someone who's not a Christian advice?
It's hard, I think that for me, Christianity saved my life. And I think that we'll start with, for those who aren't believers, I think it's our job to try to give them exposure to Christ in a way that is going to be comforting, in a way that's welcoming, in a way that's open and non-judgmental. For those of us who live with mental health, but even if you don't, everyone in this world, we all have to accept that we live in an uncertain world. We live in a world where we don't know what tomorrow holds. But Christ is the one thing we can be certain of. And so if we can teach people that there's an opportunity to have certainty in something bigger than ourselves, it allows us to live through this anxiety, through this pain, through the struggle that they may be going with right now. There was a recent sermon that I attended that I loved, and the message was, "You're not enough, and that's okay." And this really resonated because the secular world, what we've been telling people all the time is like, you're enough, you're so wonderful, you're so great, you're enough, and we all have it in ourselves, and we're so amazing, when really, I'm not enough. I needed God. I need God every day. We need Jesus to help us understand the unknowns, the unpredictable, to deal with our anxiety, and to have us rooted in something that's eternal. And so I think it's really important for us to remember that we have to not just, share the message of Christ, but be an example of Christ. And if we can show people the peace that we get in our life because of Christ, there is no greater gift for others to witness than that.
And I think that's modeled for all of us in how we live our lives, like she said, but also just how we own our stuff. We all have stuff. We all have issues. And sadly, I think the longer we're around church, we cover that up, and we try to make it think that we all make everybody think we have it all together. And so I think the more we live transparently, and people see that, obviously appropriately, not that we have to go and, hey, how are you today? And you just, off to the races where people's eyeballs get this big, right? There's a time and a place for that. But I think the more that we have those people we can confide in, then the world looks at us and they go, oh, Christianity. So many people think of Christianity as, oh yeah, they've got all their stuff, they're prim and proper, and they've got everything put together. But that's the opposite of the gospel, because if we didn't need Jesus, then he would not have come to the planet. We'd still be in the Garden of Eden and everything would be fine. And so as we lean into that, as we live that, the world sees that and goes, okay, not that it's okay to just stay in this place of not doing well, but as we lean into that, as we're transparent, then the world is endeared to that and they want more of that. So talk to us just a little bit more. So we've talked about counseling, therapy. What are some other good resources? If I'm here in this room, whether I have a mental illness or I don't, I'm just struggling with anxiety, depression, what are some other good resources we can look to?
Totally. I think the first thing is finding a support group. It's so important for us to find other people who we can relate to. When we're struggling with mental illness, when our siblings are struggling, with us struggling, when our parents are struggling, it's really important that they find a community and a group of individuals who they can relate to the struggle, right? We can relate to one another in different ways and talk about it and be there, right? When we think about all models of mental health, that's really one of the first parts, is this support group, a community. The second is appropriate treatment. There is appropriate treatment for any diagnosis of any mental health diagnosis you're living with. So if you're living with PTSD, if you're living with an eating disorder, if you're living with OCD, if you're living with depression, there is specific treatment for you. And there are individuals who specialize in certain disorders. And so it is critical when you're looking for treatment that you're not going to a general practitioner who's just doing talk therapy, and we call that supportive therapy. It makes you feel better in that moment, but they're not actually treating the problem. They're not giving you, really important treatment tools so that you can address what you're dealing with. So it's really important that you get appropriate treatment. And for me, what I always talk about as the most important leg, I think, is when you start to help other people. I think a lot of us don't talk about that as a part of like a recovery model, but it's actually what I think is, when you look at addiction therapy, they got it right. Yep. When you think about the model is, you do your 12 steps, you do your treatment, you create a community, and then you become a sponsor and you help someone else. Because what happens is when we start to help other people, for the first time, we start to believe that something good can come from the struggle that we've had, right? There is now a purpose to the pain that we've had to deal with. Doesn't mean it makes it okay. Doesn't mean I wouldn't wish I still didn't have OCD or that I couldn't get rid of someone else's. We still wish those things. However, it's a perspective shift where it's like, okay, there is some sort of meaning in this struggle I've had to live through. And that, to me, is that important final leg.
Totally. And I think there's so much we can learn from that just as we model that and lean into just other people that need help with whatever they're going through. The last question before I want to just turn it to you for final thoughts would be, we talked a little bit about social media and what it's done to our society. I obviously always think about our youth in that. Our youth, this is the first generation that has not grown up without social media. That's all they've really ever known. So there's this delicate tension of, I said this last week, but social media is not the devil, but it also, there's some very positive things that it brings about. You know, the friend that lives in Iowa that you would never see, like, oh wow, they just had a new kid, and that's great. So there's some positives of that, but there's also some very overwhelming negatives. So how do we live in the tension and walk that balance, especially for, I think, of young teenagers or teenage parents? How do they walk that balance of not running to the extreme and hiding their head in the sand and saying, we're never touching social media again, but also not letting it become all-consuming?
Yeah, so the first thing we want to talk about when we talk about social media use for adolescents is what's the function of it, and us setting boundaries, right? When we are parents in general, everyone needs boundaries, right? You can't go to work and be on social media all day and not do your job. Like, that's going to impact your work. And so we need to teach healthy boundaries. What's also important is that social media doesn't become our metrics for who we're supposed to be, right? It often becomes a place where adolescents go to compare, adolescents go, and it serves them in a really negative way. And so what I want to know is the social media that you're using serving you, or is it hurting you, right? At the end of the day, what do you get from it? And it's really important for us to figure out how can we engage in activities and things that build us up versus breaking us down. You know, and so again, there is no right or wrong, right? Parenting doesn't come with a handbook that we all just follow and it's easy and it works for every kid. It's what works for you. But you have to think about what serves us and what doesn't. The one thing I want to talk about for a second is that when we look at what's happened in the world, when you look at death for rates of heart disease, cancer, terminal illnesses, historically they've gone down, right? We continue to see the rates of those deaths per year going down because we are advancing in treatments. Suicide's going up. We have to think about that, we have to talk about it, and we need to understand what can be contributing to it.
So important. We had, as we shared earlier, there was a death in our community this past week. And I think it's why it's important to have these conversations about subjects like this. What final thoughts would you have for us, just as kind of a 60-second takeaway? I know it's hard. You could spend hours talking about it, but do you have any final thoughts you may have not already shared?
Yeah, I think the message I always want to send is that help and hope are always available. There might be some of you or someone you love who's in a place right now that they don't believe that. It is our job to help them believe that, to help them see that, and to help them know that. And if you're in that place, whether it's for yourself or someone you love, help and hope are available. You just have to fight really hard sometimes to get the right help. But what I can promise is that when we get the right help, we're able to be filled with hope about the life that we didn't think we could have.
Can y'all give Dr. McIngvale a huge round of applause? Thank her for being here today.
Thank you.
Before she sits down, I just want you to know, number one, how much I appreciate, Liz and I both appreciate her friendship. And then also just for you to know, just full disclosure, she does this just purely out of the goodness of her heart because she wants to help people. I tried to offer her just some help for travel, and she refused that. And so because of just her heart and our heart to partner with churches, I've talked with some folks on our financial team, and we want to make a gift to the Peace of Mind Foundation to help support the work that they're doing. So can y'all give her one more big round of applause and thank her for all that they do? I just want to share just a couple final takeaways, and then we're going to go into a time of invitation. So really some things that I think we learned today is, number one, we've got to make it a habit to renew our mind. We talked about that earlier. Romans 12:2 says this. It says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. As we heard, there's a variety of avenues to do that. It's through Jesus. It's through getting in groups. It's through reaching out for help and just leaning on the people around us. The second thing that we can take away from today is this: get help when you need it. I would say it this way: when in doubt, reach out. And then the final thing that I would say as a takeaway is just to put support around you. And those two things go hand in hand, that if we don't put people around us, then we're going to continue to struggle, and others will as well. Let's pray, and we'll go into a time of invitation.